Today is January 17th, 2023. My name is Richard Perez. I'm a Veterans Benefit Coach with the Kings County Library. This interview is part of the Veterans History Project. Please state your full name.
Joseph Sotero Castro.
Well, Mr. Castro, thank you for taking the time out of your day today to share your military service and journey. Before we begin, let's go ahead and why don't you give me a brief overview of your whole service?
I joined in 1975 and I got out and retired in 1995. I had broken service, so I was in for 4 years from 75 to 79, served aboard 2 ships, and then I got out and went back in 1981 to 1986. Again, I had 2 commands, 1 ship and 1 shore command, and I got out because I couldn't make E6, so I was out for approximately 3 or 4 years, and then I decided to finish off my 20, so I went back in from 91 to 95, and in 95 they offered a 15-year retirement, which I took because I still couldn't make E6, and there I did 2 commands as well, one shore command and then 1 onboard ship.
Well, thank you, Mr. Castro, for giving me that brief overview, and again, thank you for your service to our nation. And let's start back and go into more detail about your whole start of your service and your career and your journey. Let's start off with, where are you from?
I'm from Bakersfield, California.
Are your parents still with us?
No, they're not.
What did they do for a living?
My dad worked for the post office, which he retired from, and he also did ceramic tile on the side. My mom worked for the school district. She worked with vocational stuff.
Do you have any brothers and sisters?
Yes, I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters.
Did any of them serve in the military?
My older brother was National Guard. He served in, I believe, 1971. And then my little brother was Marines. He served in 1975. And then also my dad was Army. He served during the Korean conflict.
Thank you. You come from a family of a lot of military service.
Yes.
So what did you do before serving in the military, Mr. Castro?
I bounced around with different jobs, but mostly I did sign painting and artwork and graphics.
And what military branch of service did you serve in?
I joined the USS Navy.
Were you drafted or enlisted?
I enlisted.
And what year was that?
It was 1975.
And what inspired your choice of military branch?
I had a good friend that wanted to go into the Navy, and we decided to go in together.
So how was the boot camp experience?
It's a shock. It's definitely different. There's a lot of different people from different places, and mindsets are different. Very structured, obviously. I wouldn't say it was extremely tough, but it was challenging.
So your adjustment to military life, how was that?
It came about slowly, but it got there. It takes a few weeks to get acclimated to some of the rules or the way things are ran, but you find your way through.
So during your basic training and your boot camp, is there any special training that you conducted?
No, I didn't get any special training there. Since I went in the aviation field originally, anybody who doesn't have a special school, they send to a 2-week course outlining avionics.
Okay. So once you graduated from your boot camp and your training, what did you do on leave? Did you take leave?
Just went home, I'm sure. I don't really remember, but I was transferred from boot camp San Diego, and my first command was the USS Coral Sea in Long Beach, California. And since I live in Bakersfield, I mean, it's just hours away, so.
So that was an ideal location to get stationed at. And did you like your first duty assignment?
Yes, I did.
Anything special you want to talk about within your first duty assignment that you?
I just remember they had a pier there. I forget what they called it, but a lot of sailors went there. It was set up like a carnival. I remember they had movie theaters that were open 24 hours, so there was always something to do there.
Okay. Let's transition to some of your training exercises and deployments. What year or years did you deploy?
I deployed twice, once on board the USS Ranger in 1979, and I also deployed with the USS Samuel Gompers in 1994 and 95.
What military training deployment operations did you conduct? Was there any operations within those deployments?
If I recall correctly, there was something going on in Yemen, and we actually went there to support the conflict with Yemen, but going through the Malacca Straits, our ship actually hit a tanker and we were put out of commission. So we had to go to the Philippines to get patched up, and then from there we went to Japan to get repaired. And then when I went overseas with the Samuel Gompers, we went there in support of, I believe it was Operation Southern Watch, which is after the conflict there with Iraq.
Okay. So what were some of the stresses associated with your deployment?
Obviously missing home, finances, and just thinking about the home life and missing it is all.
How would you say that these experiences impacted your life?
It makes you more independent, finding ways to get around things, to get things fixed, problems taken care of, being accountable for things.
Okay. Mr. Castro, tell me a little bit about your military friendships.
Obviously, you meet a lot of people in the military, and some are more special than others. I'm still in contact with some of the people from the USS Ranger when I deployed in '79, and then I have a good friend that I still stay in contact with from the USS Fulton. But for the most part, a lot of them slip. A lot of the friendships, we lose touch, but there are a few that I still communicate with.
Well, that's good. And staying in contact, how do you usually stay in contact with them?
One is Facebook. I don't do much on Facebook, but if I know they're on there, there's a group, so if I need to contact them, I'm able to do that. I have another friend actually two friends that I keep in contact through a text every now and again.
Sounds good. So you use different platforms. And times have changed from the 70s and 60s
to yes.
Now, where how you can just contact a friend across the other part of the world in an instant,
Well, I remember when I was in the 70s, there's no, actually not the 70s, but 94, 95, cell phones weren't very popular. And nowadays, I don't know, but I'm assuming they have cell phones and laptops and ways to communicate when someone goes overseas. I remember when I was overseas, one of the times is what they do is they open up the ship and they have the Mars, which is the satellite radio. So they have people who run Mars station, they make a connection, and then from that connection they call home, and you're able to talk to your loved one at home. So this was the first time I did this, and you had to stand in line on board the ship. They say Mars is open at this time, so everybody goes up, lines up, and then you stand in line, and they ask for your information, who you're calling. They make that contact, and it's not quiet. You have to talk over a radio so everybody hears everything, and you only get like 3 minutes to talk, and you have to say, you know, hello, over, and then the person has to say, hello, over, I love you, over, or whatever. So now it comes to my turn, so I go up, and they call my wife. So they said, and the long distance was coming out of, like, I'll say Chicago. So they said they have a long distance phone call from Joe from Chicago, will you accept? She knew I was overseas, so she said no. So they hung up, and I just stood there. It was like, oh my gosh. So then I walked away with my tail between my legs, and then next time I got a hold of her, I said, next time you get a phone call from Joe from anywhere, you take it.
So I'm sure there's no more missed phone calls.
Yeah, well, I'm out now, so it's no.
So, Mr. Castro, is there any specific memories about your service in the U.S. Navy that come to mind that you'd like to talk about?
I just remember doing a lot of traveling, getting orders, whether traveling in a private vehicle or whether traveling in a U-Haul or airplane, but we did a lot of traveling, and there's a lot of stories in the travels that we've done. Even arriving at commands and not being prepared for a command, and financially, and having some struggles finding apartments or places to stay, things like that. Even repairing cars, just a lot of I don't know, roadblocks, I'll say.
So, Mr. Castro, your military service ends and you're returning home. How was your return home?
I think it was a good transition. I retired, and finding a job was a little tough, but I got help from my sister and my brother-in-law. They work for the sheriff's department, and they put in a good word for me when I applied, and I got on with them. I first started with in the ID unit, where we labeled fingerprints, ID'd them, ID'd individuals. I did that for 2 years, and was promoted to going to the crime scenes and collecting evidence. And I did that for approximately 11 years, and then there was a downsizing with Kern County, so I was part of a layoff on that.
Okay. So, Mr. Castro, did you continue your education?
No, I didn't.
Have you stayed in contact with your fellow veterans?
Yeah, some of them.
Let's talk about some reflections of your military service. Do you attend reunions, or are you involved with any military organizations or ceremonies?
I'm a member of the VFW, and I haven't made any reunions as of yet. I'm trying to, but usually finance or time is keeping me from doing it, but I'm still looking into doing some reunions.
How was your military service affected your life, and what life lessons or observations did you gather?
Again, I think it just made me more independent, finding ways through problems. I remember one time having a flat tire at a new command and not knowing anybody, and I remember taking the tire out and rolling it to a gas station about a half mile away, and then rolling it back to put it on, because you have no one to call, you don't know anybody.
It had to have been a pretty challenging experience there, going to a new location and not having the resources at the time.
Yeah, I mean, you don't realize it until you're put in that position, but I mean, whether you're shopping, good neighborhoods, bad neighborhoods, who to trust for a mechanic, you just starting all over again, and then having no friends to ask or references.
So your resiliency was very strong, and you were able to adapt.
Yes.
So, Mr. Castro, future generations will see this interview. What would you like them to know?
I think the military is probably not for everybody, but I definitely respect people who do their time in the military.
Is there anything else you would like to add with your experience in any of your assignments your commands? I know you mentioned you had 2 commands. You talked about the first one, which was with the USS Coral Sea. What about your second command? Any memories or anything you want to share your experience with that?
No. The USS Ranger, I checked aboard when it was in Bremerton, Washington, in dry dock. Did about a year there, and then after dry dock, we got ready for a Westpac, and then I deployed towards the end of my service on that tour. I finished it off with a Westpac on the Ranger.
And was that your last tour? Did you retire? What was your last tour you retired?
The last one I retired from was the USS Samuel Gompers.
Where was that at?
That was in the Persian Gulf. That was the Operation Southern Watch, I believe is what it was. So we went there to repair ships in the Persian Gulf. And that was one thing that I learned as well. My first 2 commands were aircraft carriers, which are combatant ships. So a combatant ship does its job out at sea. So when they hit port, they want to keep them in port as little as possible. So we're in port anywhere from 3 days to maybe 10 days, maybe a week. Whatever they need to load supplies, do what they need to, and then get back out, because our job is out at sea. You can't fly planes in port. So we go out to sea, that's where our job is. So now then when I was on a tender, which I was on a submarine tender and a destroyer tender, our job is to repair ships. So our job is in port. So when we hit port, we're there for 3 months. We don't go out to sea. We stay there and repair those ships and make sure they get back out. So I learned that being aboard a tender, that I didn't realize there were different functions in the Navy.
Right. And being a tender sounds like it's very important, because the ships rely on you. I mean, can you give me an example, like what kind of repairs you would do? Like, you would like repair maybe like a carrier or any other types of?
We repair anything, a submarine, aircraft carrier, doesn't matter. On board a carrier, you've got dental offices, medical offices, you've got your kitchen, you've got everything operating, and some of them need paperwork. So we would print schedules, we would print whatever, we'd put them in pads, and they would have the pads to do their work with or record anything. They have labels, everything is exposed on board a ship. All the wiring, all the water lines, everything's exposed. So if there's an issue, you can repair it fast. You don't have to go into the walls. So everything's labeled, so we would make labels for whatever is needed, whether it's salt water, fresh water, steam, the direction of travel, electrical, you name it. So we would make plaques for that. They would pour metal, make machine parts, fix ships, fix the motors, the engines, make cabinets, anything they needed, that's what we did. I mean, I remember when we pulled in Japan, the Japanese were repairing our ships, and they were charging us, and they were working slower than we did. Once we hit port, we worked 24 hours and for free, so we got those ships out, and we made a big difference.
It seems like you had a lot of different overseas ports and experience. How did the local population in some of those other countries treat the sailors?
A lot of them received us well, and it was very enjoyable. It was pretty neat walking around the different cultures, the food, and just the way of life was pretty neat. But there were places that wouldn't cater to us. I remember going in Japan into a specific restaurant and not being served, and later going back to the ship. Once we start conversing with our friends and telling our stories, we learn that there's places that don't like Americans, and won't serve them, and we happened to stop into one of those restaurants, so they didn't even talk to us at all. We went in, sat there for maybe 5, 10, 15 minutes, and then we realized we weren't getting served and we left.
Okay. So I see you brought a few memorabilias here, and you know, we could talk about some of them. Like I see you had the USS Missouri ball cap in Pearl Harbor. Did you serve with that?
No, that's whenever we make our deployments, they have a route that they usually hit Hawaii first, and then they work their way over to Japan or the Philippines or wherever they're going, to the Indian Ocean or whatever. But Hawaii is always one of the stops, leaving and coming back. Mm-hmm. And being there, a lot of us went to the USS Missouri.
So when you were up in Bremerton, up in the Northwest, did you like that assignment down there? I mean, any specific things that you were able to do on your off time with your family? What are some things that you did, not only while you were serving in the Navy, but I'm sure you've had some opportunities with your family to do out there?
Well, that was where my first daughter was born. I was on board the USS Coral Sea, and I'd been on there for 2 years. And when they were getting ready to deploy, and I would have been underway during her birth, and I didn't want to be away. It was my first child. So I did whatever I could to get off the ship, and I ended up getting what they call a swap. And a swap is when I reach out to somebody and they're about the same as me. They've got 2 years in, they're the same rank, the same job title, everything's the same. And so what we do is we agree to switch places. So we take vacation, and when I return to his ship and he returns to mine, and we replace each other. So that's called a swap. So I did a swap from the Coral Sea to the Ranger, and then my daughter was born in 1977 when I was aboard the Ranger, and then shortly after that I separated with my wife. So Bremerton itself was very small town. It was very boring. We used to call it Bummertown instead of Bremerton. Occasionally we would go to Seattle and take on some of their entertainment there, but we were there for a year while I was in dry dock, and then after that our home port was Coronado or North Island, and that's where we returned to.
So you mentioned Coronado, North Island, so what do you mean by home port?
The home port, a ship has a home port, which means that's where they're out of. It doesn't mean they're going to stay there, but that's their address.
Oh, okay. So that's where they base their ship prior to leaving and returning.
Yeah, well, if you ever notice, they have what they call FPO and APO.
Oh, yes.
Those are the addresses to a ship, and I don't recall which one's which, mm-hmm. But one is the address to North Island, and the other one is to the ship. Mm-hmm. And the one to the ship, they have to hunt you down to see where you're at. So if you're in Japan or Hong Kong or Philippines, they're looking at where you're at. The other one, which is I'm going to say the FPO, I don't know the difference, but one of them is the actual address at North Island. They'll always know where the ship is, so if you send it there, they'll send it from there to the ship. The other one kind of traces you down.
Based on where you're at in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So,
I noticed you have an American flag with different languages behind you. Can you kind of elaborate about that? What is that?
That's a sheet that the pilots carry whenever they're on a mission, and if they go down, it has in different languages that they need help, and it's for pilots to get assistance if they go down.
And the red banners or straps, what are those used for? I know you have those on display too.
Yeah, that's removed before flight on aircraft. There's things that need to be, since that wasn't my job, I'm not real familiar with what parts were locked, but some parts are locked into place when they're parked, but once they fly, they need them operational. So they put those red tags there so they don't overlook them, and they remove them before flight.
I see on your uniform you have some medals and citations. What are those medals and citations?
Those are for different places or things that I've done. I don't remember all of them, but obviously if you get deployed overseas, that's a sea service ribbon. I was deployed twice, so I have 2 of those. You have good conduct ribbon, which you get 1 for every 4 years of good conduct. I had 12 years of good conduct, so I have 3 good conducts, and in fact that's the stripes on the sleeve, the lower part of the sleeve.
Oh.
Each one's for 4 years.
Or service stripes.
Yeah, so if I did 1 more year, I would have gotten 1 for 16. So, and then we got Battle E, which is for doing a good job when you're overseas. I got a Navy Achievement Medal for doing a good job in my job title. There was, I don't remember them all. National Defense, being in time of war. And then I have an expert for a pistol, 45 caliber.
Oh, wow.
And then where I served, which was Southwest Asia. So I have a ribbon for serving in that area.
And then your rank, it's very unique with the U.S. Navy, trying to really understand. So can you kind of explain how the rank works on you, based on your rank on your uniform?
Well, in every branch, you have enlisted and officers, and if I'm not mistaken, there's 9 ranks in each, E1 to E9, 01 to 09, but each branch calls them something different, whether it be a sergeant, a corporal, or a second class, or so their terminology is different. But nevertheless, this is an E5 ranking with the 2 stripes underneath with the eagle. 3 stripes underneath would be an E6.
Okay. So, is there anything else that we missed? I know with some of your assignments you had, Mr. Castro. I was looking over your biography, and I noticed you listed, what was it, in China Lake, or you were at China Lake or Fallon, Nevada?
Yeah. I was sent to China Lake in 1991, or 90 or 91, I believe the ending of 90, and we had just started a conflict with Iraq, and it was my understanding that they went over to bomb from Fallon. A lot of the planes came out of Fallon, so we were deployed to watch the base in Fallon, Nevada during that exercise.
And then in 1994, you transferred to the Samuel Gompers?
Yep.
AD-37?
Correct.
Destroyer, right?
Yes, destroyer tender.
And how long were you aboard on that destroyer tender?
I believe it was only 1 year. Is what happened was I completed my shore service. In the military you have rotation, so for every 4 years shore, of course it depends on your job title, but for mine, for every 4 years I do at sea, I get 4 years shore. So I completed my 4 years shore, so I had to do 4 years sea. That put me at 15 years when I was on board the Samuel Gompers, which was, I was only on board for 1 year. They decided to decommission the ship on the way back from deployment. So since they were decommissioning it, I only have 1 year sea service. I knew I was going back to sea service on another ship. And since I couldn't get an answer on what ship they were sending me to, and they offered a 15-year retirement, I took the 15-year retirement. But otherwise, I would have had 3 more years of sea service to do.
Okay. Well, Mr. Castro, is there anything else that you would like to speak about? I'd like to do an overview. I see you have a pilot's helmet and you have some picture frames that look really unique, and especially the one that you showed me on the aircraft carrier that has a bunch of POVs, privately owned vehicles and privately owned boats. And can you elaborate on why that is? That's the first time I've ever seen that on on an aircraft carrier.
Well, yeah, I will, but there's one thing I'd like to mention is another thing too, when you come back from a deployment, when you hit Hawaii, they have what they call a Tiger Cruise. And the Tiger Cruise is, well, first of all, when you're coming back, there's a lot of people that want to get home. So we hit Hawaii, and they people who want to get home put in for vacation or leave, and they fly home. They go home. So that opens up racks, and then they have what they call a Tiger Cruise, and that Tiger Cruise allows somebody to invite loved ones, not significant others, but loved ones to come aboard, or friends, and see what the Navy life is from Hawaii back to the mainland. So I offered that to my dad and one of my uncles, actually two of my uncles, but one decided he didn't want to go, which he regretted long after that. Nevertheless, I had my Uncle Tony and my dad. They came aboard in Hawaii, and they rode the ship back. And the other thing too is when you're finished with a deployment, any ship we pass, since we're all done, we give all our supplies out that we don't need to other ships or anybody who needs them to make use of them. So we're just getting rid of stuff. So now the same thing goes with the food. So when we hit Hawaii and we're going back to our home port, and our visitors are on board, they put their tray in for food. They give them as much food as they want. They're getting rid of steaks. They're getting rid of anything that they can get rid of. And my dad and my uncle both said, I don't know why you don't like the Navy. They treat you so good out here. And I kept telling them, Dad, it's not like this. I says, we're going home. We're getting rid of stuff. I says, you can hold your tray there for an hour, and they're not giving you any more. You guys, they're giving you whatever you want. I says, it's not the same. So I felt really good that I was able to do that for my dad and let him see what my life was somewhat like.
All right, that was an awesome experience. Thank you, Father. You guys got to bond with your uncle and really see how it is to be a sailor on an aircraft carrier.
Yes.
Because I was told many times it's like a city in sea.
I remember him telling me too that they didn't want to go too many places because they kept getting lost.
On the aircraft carrier?
No, on the tender, which is
tender. Well, the tender was
and the tender's half the size of a carrier.
But even then, I'm sure there's some unique little places that didn't even know about. How long did it take for you to travel from Hawaii to back home?
I don't remember. I'm thinking it was less than a week.
Oh, okay. So how's your dad's sea legs and everything, okay?
Yeah.
Him being an Army soldier, we're used to land instead of sea.
Well, he had a complaint about that as well, but he was older, so you don't realize it, but when the ship's moving and the ship's moving up and you're going up steps, it's very, very difficult to go up. You have to wait for it to drop to go up. So there's a few challenges getting used to a ship.
Well, Mr. Castro, this is coming to the closing of your interview, and again, thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview, to share your experience, to share your personal journey, but most importantly, thank you to the service to our nation.
Thank you very much.
I want to go ahead, before we close out, I want to just do a overview scan.
Oh, you know what?
Yes, sir.
Too, I'd like to mention how I met my wife.
Yes.
I was stationed in Groton, Connecticut, on board the USS Fulton. And the locals opened up their homes for sailors who couldn't make it home for Thanksgiving. And her family is one that opened their
home to you.
Yes. So I showed up, and I guess I'm the visitor that never left.
It was love at first sight. And your mother-in-law said, he's a good eater. Let's keep this one.
1981,
1981.
Thanksgiving, so we know when we met.
So you've been married for, what, 38 years. Congratulations, that's a blessing.
And we have 2 children,
That's good.
Lauren and Jenny.
And how old are they?
Lauren is 31, 32, and Jenny's 31. Oh, that's right, because it's January, she just turned 31.
Just turned 31. Well, that's awesome. And thank you to your wife, to Mrs. Castro, because being a military wife is very challenging.
Yes.
And having to stay home and take care of the home front while your husband has to go overseas and defend freedom and serve our nation. And a lot of times, a lot of families have to sacrifice that personal time, and especially the bonding time with you had to sacrifice for your wife and your children, and now you're back.
It does take 2 very strong people,
Yes.
and I'm very, very lucky that it worked out.
Well, thank you again, Mr. Castro, and thank you, Mrs. Castro, for your service to our country and for taking the time
Okay.
for this interview.
Thank you.
And then I'll just go ahead and do a little scan here. So this is Mr. Castro's.
My yearbooks, my cruise books, some of my medals, some of my hats from the commands, my uniform.
Oh yeah, look at that.
A couple of photos, and a helmet that I acquired from one of the carriers.
Yeah, look at those photos right there.
And then that one to the left is an aircraft carrier with all the vehicles on board when we
Yeah, I
were
know, I couldn't believe
when
it.
we were in dry dock in Bremerton, Washington. Once we completed our dry dock, we had to go back to our home port, which was San Diego, North Island. So they offered people to either take leave and meet the ship down there, or the ones that wanted to were able to ride this ship down and take their vehicles on board and their family. So I actually have a letter that's